members, in following the Noble Lord, Lord Naseby, I will start by reflecting on some of the safety issues that the Noble Lord raised, and particularly start by picking up a phrase the Noble Lord, the Minister, used in the introductory speech, saying that the introduction of self-driving cars, excuse me, the introduction of self-driving cars could mean the lack of human error saves lives, close quote. Now, of course, automation does not remove human error. It simply changes the potential site of the human error from an individual vehicle to a programming system, to an algorithm, to the control system that's applied to many vehicles. So there is the potential for one error to be multiplied many times with disastrous impacts. It also allows individual actions, say malevolent actions, to produce mass effects, as a number of Noble Lords have referred to in terms of what's happened simply with people running around with traffic cones in San Francisco. We are, of course, speaking just a couple of weeks after the National Cybersecurity Centre produced its 7th annual review, noting that UK critical infrastructure is at grave risk. We are potentially, by relying on this single system, multiple systems, creating a much higher critical safety risk, and indeed a resilience risk. I was this morning with the National Trust talking about climate adaptation and resilience, and we need to look at all of this in terms of our systems. If we rely on these systems, keep using them for years, what will happen to the skills of drivers should we suddenly actually need individual people to again take to the road and control vehicles? What, of course, happens, as we've seen in San Francisco, if they all suddenly stop working or indeed decide to assemble in one place? What does that do to the actual functioning of our society? Now, where I was going to start was actually at the Bonn Climate Talks, COP23 in 2017. And I recall from there was actually a near state of panic among members of the climate community, because back then in 2017, it was thought that we could see self-driving HGVs all over the place any day now, and that would potentially have massive impacts in terms of climate impacts, in that HGVs now spend a large amount of their time parked up because the drivers need rest periods, there's limited availability of drivers. If you put the self-driving into the equation, then you could potentially massively increase the climate impacts. But actually, Noble Lords might note that that was 2017, and there's actually much less fear now. So I really begin my contribution today by making a call for realism, for understanding what this bill is actually about, the environment in which it arrives. And I've already challenged the Noble Lady Baroness Penn when she was wearing the Treasury hat, because a government spokesperson did brief the Telegraph that this bill could mean that we could see self-driving vehicles on our roads by 2026, comma, if they were proved safe. Now, the Noble Lady Baroness Penn, being of course a skilled operator as she is, when I challenged her on this, agreed with me that yes, if they were proved safe, this would be possible. Well, I might run a 2-hour marathon if I was 30 years younger and had entirely different genetics. That's not the world that we live in. So I'm really asking for an acknowledgement of the realism of the situation as we conduct our debate as we go forward in this bill. However, I'm going to start with a positive, with a potential positive impact if we were to see self-driving vehicles, even if we were to see self-driving vehicles operating in small areas in controlled circumstances, which I think is a far more likely possibility. One study I was looking at noted that for self-driving vehicles to operate effectively, roads may need to be kept free of small debris and uneven surfaces smoothed. Now, a number of other Noble Lords have already referred to the current state of our roads. So let's imagine that we're going to go ahead with self-driving autonomous vehicles. Just think about what our roads might look like for the rest of us to enjoy. However, I would ask for a little bit of realism here. Do we actually have the capacity financial or human skills or indeed machinery to deliver roads entirely free of debris and entirely free of uneven surfaces, because I'm afraid I do rather doubt it. And I think this raises important points raised by the Nobel Lady Baroness Bowles that I want to highlight, that we do need to think, and this will come down to the detail of our later debate, about statistics and data. The road conditions in the US, in France, in Australia are very different to here. Can we actually extrapolate figures on safety from there and apply them here? And if we can't, how do we actually get the figures at a scale in the UK? I think that really is a terribly important point. Now, I'm not sure that anyone's directly referred to this, but it is worth noting that issue of safety, that the Transport Select Committee has looked at this in some detail. And I think we're going to have large debates on this at a later stage. Is the careful and competent human driver the right test to be applying? Improved safety is not a given in the real circumstances of our road. And as the RAC Foundation has said, when we put our lives in the hands of automated machinery, we expect it to perform to the highest standards of safety. That's an expectation people have. And we know that human beings make mistakes. And we know that as pedestrians, as cyclists, as other drivers, we make allowances for other people's mistakes. But we're not necessarily going to apply the same kind of criteria to autonomous vehicles. Now, I want to focus. I think this debate has moved as we've progressed through. A number of the early speeches were very much focused on the positive opportunities seen in autonomous vehicles. Lord Warner Aberystwyth was one of those people. But I want to address some policy points about the environmental risks of self-driving or autonomous cars. If we see as a result of them more vehicles on our road, more journeys, longer journeys, then we could see increased emissions, and I think most of us assuming that these will be electric vehicles, but of course about half of the PM2.5, the particulate matter, small particulate matter pollution from vehicles comes from brakes and tyres, and autonomous vehicles still have brakes and tyres. There's the congestion issues, there's also the noise and the sheer disruption caused by vehicles moving around our roads. Now, there is actually some actual real data on this from partially autonomous vehicles. There was a study in California in 2019 which found that partially autonomous vehicles, their owners were taking them on longer journeys, particularly at weekends. And that makes sense when you think about it. You can put your feet up, play a computer game, read, have a sleep, and so you decide you're going to take a long weekend trip to the other end of the UK. If lots of people do that, that has a significant real environmental and social impact. There's also the risk of, let's imagine it's the theatre just up the road. Lots of people decide they've got an autonomous vehicle and it costs heaps to park in the city, but you don't need to park an autonomous vehicle. You get it to drive you to the theatre, you send it home again, and then you call it when you want to leave in the evening. Can Noble Lords think about what Charing Cross Road might look like under those circumstances? What kind of chaos, what it might do to the buses? And finally, an issue that no one else has raised and I think is really important, and we need to look at it in many areas beyond simply autonomous vehicles. There's a temptation to think of the cloud, to think of algorithms. Is this being an immaterial, something that happens out there in the cloud with no real-world physical consequences? But actually, we can thank researchers from MIT. An article that was published in the IEEE microjournal, Sudhakar et al., that actually calculated what impact using the data, processing the data, using the algorithms, what the environmental cost of that could be. And, Noble Lords, forgive me, I'm going to put some large numbers in a second. Data centres now produce about 0.3% of global climate change emissions. That's the same as Argentina. The MIT study would show that if you had, basically the world went to autonomous vehicles, 1 billion autonomous vehicles in the world, that demand for energy for those data centres would double. If an autonomous vehicle has 10 deep neural networks processing the images from 10 cameras, and it drives for 1 hour a day, it has to make 21.6 million inferences each day. 1 billion vehicles means 21.6 quadrillion influences. To put that into perspective, all of Facebook's data centres now make a few trillion inferences a day. 1 quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. Take the numbers away, and there is a huge demand for energy, for computing power, for all of the technology, the computers, the databases. Where are we going to find the capacity in the world to deliver that when we still have children in Africa who don't have a light bulb at night to do their homework from, where we still have areas of India that need the most basic levels of infrastructure? We need to look at all of this in this policy context. Now, I've got 2 other points I want to bring up. Lord Cameron of Dillington made what I think was a really disturbing suggestion. We might have to bring in anti-jaywalking laws to allow for autonomous vehicles. My lords, what is our economy and society for? Are we here to serve the needs of people, or are we all here to service the machines? I think that's a question the Noble Lord's point really does raise. And just one other point that the Noble Lord Tennycliffe raised that I think was an important issue that might be seen as is explicitly excluded from the scope of this bill. But the Noble Lord referred to delivery vehicles that we've seen examples of, and indeed drones as well, autonomous systems that may not use the roads but that multinational companies see replacing human beings and delivering using lots of our public spaces, the air and the pavements. Can the Noble Lord the Minister tell us now, or perhaps by letter later, I understand it might not be in the briefing, what the government's plans are, what the government's thinking is about ensuring regulation of those, which brings me to just finally to reinforce the points about the need for all of this to be inclusive by design made by both the Noble Lady Baroness Brinton and the Noble Lord Holmes. We need to think about how all of our streets and pavements and airspace works for people, not for the benefits of multinational companies and their machines.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to speak after